development through ensuring loss and damage fund that is fair and is not debt, but through grants. So the COP presidency contains our suggestions for climate action. It looks at progress, setbacks, and gaps, all through the lens of our Catholic social teaching. Let's be honest, this COP has more fossil fuels officials here than before. There are concerns that have been raised about it that, oil deals are being made behind the scene. The money that is being pledged for various funds usually might come in the form of debt. We still have to read the lines, in between the lines. And again, we need to make sure that it actually addresses what we need to address. So mine is to welcome you and thank you for being here and for listening to this Global Catholic letter that we are presenting to you through the panelists here today. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are in the world right now joining us. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this side event organised by the Global Catholic Actors at the UN. My name is Jean Quinn and I am a member of the Congregation of the Daughters of Wisdom and presently the Executive Director of Unanima International, an NGO made up of a coalition of 25 communities of women religious, serving in over 100 countries with 25,000 members. We primarily focus our advocacy efforts at the UN in New York and here in COP about women, children and girls. As Lynn shared, this event is part of a series of Catholic advocacy actions guided by Pope Francis' recent exhortation, Laudate Deum, as well as global grassroots manifestos from across the Asia-Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Here at COP28, the first global stock taking place tells us we are not on track for meeting our climate goals and curtailing the climate crises. Multilateral approaches are necessary to address the climate crisis, yet too often those who are experiencing the ramifications of climate change are excluded from the seats at the table where global policy decisions are made. Two of the cross-cutting themes at COP28 are inclusion and frontline communities. But for COP28 to be the most inclusive COP yet, decisions, discussions, and the implementation of solutions must be done, but done in collaboration with those in frontline communities. Today's event seeks to uplift those voices, elevate intersectional perspectives, and ultimately hide the ways in which political, economic, social, and environmental issues are interconnected. In doing so, we promote a holistic vision of sustainability, which considers the needs of vulnerable communities and addresses the inequities underlying our insufficient responses to climate change as a lasting systemic change to achieve a more sustainable and equitable world. Climate change affects people in every country of the world, no matter where their location or economic status is, in a diverse number of ways. As we prioritize to transition to clean energy sources, we also must confront the needs of the most vulnerable communities and the impact of this transition in particular contexts. Climate change is called a risk multiplier because whatever background risks people are facing, particularly as we know working in Unanima International, housing insecurity, extreme poverty, and gender inequities. And these will be multiplied in the face of extreme climate. And like we've been hearing these past few days for COP28 to be most inclusive COP, yet decisions, discussions, and the implementation of solutions must be done in collaboration with those most impacted by climate change. And we will hear more about the solutions from our panel this evening. But let me finish with a word from Pope Francis in Laudate Si. Pope Francis says that a global focus on principles of integral ecology could rectify relationships among people and between people and the earth. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor have the same origins in the current capitalistic and colonialism world order, in which the global north has assumed hegemonic power. Thus, because of this, integral ecology also serves as a moral and ethical response to the global challenges. I think you would say these are sober words from Pope Francis. So this evening, I'm delighted that we are joined by representatives from all over the world to share with you their diverse perspectives, experiences, and expertise as it relates to climate change, mitigation, just energy transitions, and integral ecology. At the end of all the speakers, we will have a question and answer session, so you can prepare your questions and answers for that moment. But for now, let us move on to our speakers. We are looking at the event this evening through the See, Judge and Act procedure or methodology. And really what we're trying to do is look at what is going on in our world. What are we seeing in our faith communities? And then how we take action. And I like to think this is a discernment way of doing things. So without further ado, I will welcome our first speaker, Archbishop Chang from Asia Pacific. You're going to talk to us about climate change, how it impacts Asia Pacific territories, and the need to abandon the fossil fuel era. Archbishop, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sister. I'll begin this talk by playing you a song. So it's a little bit different. We like to sing songs in the Pacific. So the song is 6 minutes, but I will just play about 3 minutes because I want to say a few things after the song. This is a song that I composed at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's a good time to be.
Protect our home. Mother Earth is crying. Let's save our home. Family, the children are crying. Drowning in a rising sea level. Big sister, brother, they all are children are groaning. As climate change destroys our home, the poor are crying. Stop the CO2 emissions. Mother Earth is crying. Stop burning the coal. united we rise to save our, the poor and mighty. We can protect our home. Mother Earth is crying. Let's save our home. Our state, the children are hungry, as the fish are dying. Lord, to me, but no one. The Lord reigns. As money rapes, now the earth, the poor are crying. Stop the mining, our earth is crying. Stop the logging.
This is our reality, people of the ocean. We gotta rise to stop the violation against creation. We see our reality, Mother Earth is crying. Destruction is real. We can no longer watch from the sidelines. We're holding our voices. We gotta rise to protect our home. The poor are crying. Our Mother Earth is crying. Stop the logging, stop the mining. We gotta protect our home.
Thank you very much. And that song basically tries to put together in music and art what we would like to say to the world through the language of, if there is a word that has been ringing around in wherever the events that I went to, is vulnerability. Vulnerability expresses where most of us are. So for church, then the question then is, how do we speak about God in vulnerability? Then thus the theology of vulnerability. Basically, how do we talk about God in vulnerable situations? Susan Babka is a theologian. She says, there are times when theology is muted, is silent, and it's in disaster when you can't talk about God. When you go to, after a cyclone, you can't talk about God in the old way. So how do you talk about God in vulnerability? So that's the first one. And so vulnerability is not a weakness. It's not, it's a form of power that draws, invites for participation in what Pope Francis calls the, excuse me, the multilateral approach. It's not a power over, but a power that invites. So Ronald Rolheiser, one of our modern spiritual writers, talks about the power of vulnerability that invites, that draws participation. So that's the first thing that what the song tries to explain, communicate, vulnerability. It's called the lament. The second point, and this is my last point, is that because we are church, we use the God language. And the God language is symbolic. As theologians will say, theology, faith, when we communicate God and faith, it has a symbolic structure. So we have to use symbols. And the symbols, as many have said, have the power to touch the hearts, create the imagination, and make that ecological conversion that Pope Francis talks about. And so I'm using the artistic and symbolic language. And many theologians have talked about this. I'd like to name a few. Leonardo Boff, the author of The Cry of the Earth and Cry of the Poor, which was used a lot by Pope Francis. Richard Rohr, another spiritual writer, uses symbols. The other language that carries a lot of weight is stories. Johann Metz, he says, writing in the Holocaust, he said, theology must be narrative, must be storytelling of the dangerous memories. So the letter to the COP, I've just gone through it. I hope we can tweak it a little bit to carry the language of vulnerability and use some artistic language and symbolic language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. I was very moved by that video. You couldn't but be moved. But what struck me was the lament, but also the hope, and also the numbers of people that if we come together, what we can achieve. Yes. I was very struck by that. Of course, as a daughter of wisdom, I'm going to say that for me, wisdom is in the experience. And that's what I was finding all the time, that there she is to be found. And as you talked about Mother Earth, that's exactly what we were looking at. Please forgive me for not reading out your bio at the beginning, because it should be the Catholic Archbishop of Suva, Fiji. He holds a doctorate from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, the United States, and since 2018 has been the president of the Federation of Catholic Bishops' Conferences of Oceania. And I'd say you're an absolute gift to them. So thank you very much. So our next speaker is Father Jean, who's coming from the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar. Father Jean is the Deputy Director General, Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, SECAM. He's been called for a new Africa invigorated and shaped by the gospel, and a new inculturation of the good news in families, schools, universities, politics, and economics. He has also emphasized the need for pastoral strategies to launch a new missionary momentum. You're going to talk to us about a just energy transition, which should and must guide COP28 negotiations on fossil fuel phase out.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Excellency, dear Reverend Fathers and Sisters, dear brothers and sisters. It is an honor for me to take the floor in this side event, and I would like to thank Madame Lindlin Moma, who invited me to make this presentation on behalf of Bishop Stephen Mamza, who is the president of SECAM, Justice, Peace and Development Commission. So I would like to summarize in this presentation the main ideas developed by our SECAM and our partners, especially Laudato Si movement, SIDSE, Miserere, and so forth. Dear brothers and sisters, as Catholic communities in Africa, we ask the leaders at the 28th conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to recognize their moral duty and commit to urgently taking ambitious action to protect our common home and the most vulnerable. as was recently highlighted in the African Faith Leaders Nairobi Declaration. The continent possesses both the potential and the ambition to be a vital component of the global solution to climate change. It is home to the world's youngest and fastest growing workforce, coupled with massive untapped renewable energy potential, abundant natural assets, and entrepreneurial spirit. Our continent has the fundamentals to pioneer a climate-positive pathway as a thriving, cost-competitive industrial hub with the capacity to support other regions in achieving their climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. Africa is experiencing exacerbated climate change and biodiversity impacts with health and security already at risk due to extreme weather conditions, rising sea levels, and other climate change-induced challenges. It is evident, as starkly stated in the sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that the world is not on track to keep within the 1.5 degrees limit agreed upon in Paris, and that global emissions must be cut by 45% in this decade. We welcome and celebrate Pope Francis' recent apostolic exhortation, Laudato Deum, which illustrates the global social issues of climate change and echoes the sad reality of climate change impacts. As the Pope notes, it is not possible to conceal the correlation between these global climate phenomena and the accelerated increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Laudato Deum, number 13. Pope Francis further urges, we must move beyond the mentality of appearing to be concerned but not having the courage needed to produce substantial changes. In line with this year's COP28 theme, health, recovery, and peace, we call on the leaders to ensure that they listen to the plight of the earth and of the most vulnerable by phasing out fossil fuels and endorsing and adopting the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We call on them to tackle both climate change and biodiversity loss together as they are inextricably linked. Biodiversity is collapsing in front of our very eyes, with disastrous consequences for us all and future generations. We need to protect Africa and the rights of indigenous peoples, in particular, must be uplifted as they are the best guardians of our common home. We are reminded that economic policies must prioritize efforts to accelerate emission reductions through just transition processes and operationalize the loss and damage fund, ensuring that they are aligned with the bold goal to limit global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. Pope Francis invites us to join him in this pilgrimage of reconciliation with the world that is our home, and to help make it more beautiful, because that commitment has to do with our personal dignity and highest values. May God bless the deliberations, and may they be ambitiously fruitful. Thank you for your attention.
you very much indeed, Father Jean, for that inspirational words for us this evening, and reiterating for us Pope Francis' call on leaders to phase out fossil fuels if our common home and most vulnerable, as we already know, our grassroots people that we work with, that they'll have a life free of disasters. And we particularly want to remember Africa and the indigenous people, as you rightly said, who holds the original wisdom of our common home. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And now our next speaker is, I think he's going to be online, Bishop Lizardo Estrada from Latin America and the Caribbean Catholic Bishops' Council, CELAM. He is a Peruvian Catholic Augustinian priest, auxiliary bishop, and let him speak.
Me uno al saludo de paz y bien de todas las personas de buena voluntad congregadas en esta COP número 28. La oración de tantos creyentes en el mundo entero puede contribuir a esta cumbre de las Naciones Unidas, que sea un nuevo Pentecostés en que por la acción del Espíritu de Dios podamos entendernos en todas las lenguas y redescubrir que el amor es el único camino para convertir esta casa común en un hogar. Justamente en la fiesta de Pentecostés del 2015, el 24 de mayo, el Papa Francisco firmó la carta encíclica sobre el cuidado de la casa común y le dio por título Laudato Si, una bellísima expresión en la lengua nativa de San Francisco de Asís, que significa alabado seas, y está dirigida al Creador del universo. En su reciente exhortación apostólica, Laudate Deum, el Papa insiste en esa invitación a recuperar la mirada sagrada sobre el mundo, porque un ser humano que pretende ocupar el lugar de Dios se convierte en el peor peligro para sí mismo. Desde el Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano y Caribeño, CELAM, entendemos muy bien que el lenguaje que puede contribuir al progreso de la humanidad es el bien común. Las experiencias tan significativas como por ejemplo el encuentro y cooperación con las culturas ancestrales y cosmovisiones politeístas en la Amazonía nos han ayudado a comprender que el diálogo social es la vía necesaria para restaurar los lazos sagrados entre las personas con todo lo creado. En la encíclica Fratelli Tutti, el Papa ha recalcado en esas convergencias antropológicas basadas en el diálogo respetuoso con nuestros hermanos musulmanes y la profunda imagen bíblica de aquel samaritano que se atrevió a rescatar de la muerte a su supuesto enemigo e incluso poner en juego su economía por medio de un crédito que la hospedería hasta que el hombre agonizante se recuperara integralmente. De una u otra manera, la COP28 es un espacio para ejercer esa capacidad humana de dialogar en busca del bien común. Nuestra hermana, la Madre Tierra creada por Dios, está agonizante a la vera de la historia y necesitamos una ecología samaritana con empatía, compasión y misericordia. Nos honre y nos ennoblezca como seres humanos. Pero basta de enunciados que no transforman la realidad. Ya tenemos suficientes argumentos científicos, criterios éticos y herramientas políticas que, sumadas a las motivaciones espirituales, nos permitan entrar en un diálogo orientado al cuidado de la naturaleza, a la defensa de los pobres, a la construcción de las redes de respeto y de fraternidad. En este sentido, insistimos en la definición de estrategias para que la transición energética sea justa, sustentable, integral y con medidas concretas que sean eficientes, obligatorias y se puedan monitorear fácilmente, de modo que el nuevo proceso sea drástico, intenso y cuente con el compromiso de todos. El Acuerdo de París debe complementarse con un tratado vinculante para poner fin a la era de los combustibles fósiles, como nos pide el Papa Francisco, a coordinar los esfuerzos para realizar una transición gradual hacia una economía post-extractivista. El Tratado de No Proliferación de Combustibles Fósiles es un ejemplo, puede ser una herramienta útil para este fin. Esto debe quedar explícito en las conclusiones de esta COP28 para no eludir más las responsabilidades históricas. Por favor, queridos hermanos y hermanas, les ruego a todos los que toman las decisiones y que piensen en el bien común, en el futuro de sus hijos, en los intereses que son de todos, no las circunstanciales o de unas empresas. No podemos caer en falsas soluciones. Desde América Latina y el Caribe alertamos que muchas veces se impulsa la generación de tecnologías e infraestructuras que mantiene el mismo sistema de producción y consumo y la misma necesidad de energía, lo cual aumenta la presión y la voracidad sobre los minerales metálicos y especies forestales que constituyen una nueva amenaza para la biodiversidad y las poblaciones afectadas, pero sobre todo en el sur global. Asimismo, hemos visto que las actividades pongamos toda nuestra inteligencia colaborar como instrumentos de Dios para el cuidado de la creación, cada uno desde su cultura, desde su experiencia, desde sus iniciativas y sus capacidades.
www.celam.org.
Thank you very much indeed to Bishop Luzardo. Oh, is it okay? Laudato Si movement, formerly the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and a former member of the Vatican's COVID Commission Economics Task Force. She also serves as its chief executive of Faith Invest, having previously held the position of Director of Movement Building. She joined Faith Invest in 2020 and has over 2 decades of experience engaging faiths on environmental, climate, and economic justice. Lorna worked at a senior level in Trócaire, the official overseas development agency of the Catholic Church in Ireland. She is a leading voice on faith-consistent investing in the Catholic Church. Actors are judging and acting up.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. And I think I'll leave it to Sephora afterwards to explain if there's any doubt in this room about why we need to get out of fossil fuels. I'll leave that question slightly to the side, but I want to address the question of are faith institutions getting out of fossil fuels? Is it happening? And what more can be done? So faith institutions really matter in this, really matter, because faith institutions, apart from being really important bearers of wisdom, culture, behavioral norms, societal norms, all the work of preaching, the work of educating, are also big players within the global financial markets. A recent study by Oxford University put a really conservative estimate on the main faith institution investment at $4 trillion. I think you could at least double that, if not more, because it misses out some significant areas of investment, such as the whole Islamic finance area, and the investments of up to 2,000 Catholic religious orders who have significant financial resources all over the world. Right. So that's my first point, is that faith institutions are major investors. So are they really stepping up to get out of fossil fuels? The answer there is, well, kind of, a little bit. There's a lot more work to do. So to date, 354 Catholic institutions have divested from fossil fuels. On one hand, we could say, yay, that's a great number, 354, great. But when you consider where we are right now, and the fact that Pope Francis has now written 2 letters on the environment, one of which could not be clearer, I don't think that's good enough. I really don't. I think a lot more could be done. And bear in mind, that is about 1/3 of all institutions globally who have divested from fossil fuels. So there's a lot more work to do on the divestment side. And just to say how important this is from the point of view of getting out of your institution out of fossil fuels, what the faiths do, it's disproportionate to the size of the investment. In Ireland, we worked with the Catholic Bishops' Conference, and they became the first Bishops' Conference to divest from fossil fuels. And their decision, even though they had quite a small portfolio, at the time they divested, there was no product on the market for fossil-free investments. So they didn't allow their investment managers to constrain them by saying, oh, this is too hard, you'll lose a lot of money, this isn't, like, that's the kind of questions you hear, too difficult. I won't tell the whole story, but by the end of the campaign, which mobilised the entire civil society in Ireland around this divestment, we had divested almost all the universities. The Church of Ireland divested as well. And the Irish government became the first country in the world to divest its sovereign wealth fund from fossil fuels. And that started with a faith campaign on the back of Laudato Si. and a few of us sitting in a room saying, we really need to get the bishops out of fossil fuels. We did it through the theological reflection, got them to assess their investments in light of the science and their theology based in Laudato Si. So there's a lot more work to do. Some done, a lot of work done, a lot more to do. And I work now with Faith Invest, which works across all the faiths, to help faiths to reevaluate their investment policies. In light of all their teachings, I was struck by the bishop from South America saying, no more declarations. Well, faiths are really good at declarations, really good multi-faith declarations where we stand up and proclaim that we all want a nice world. I mean, there's more to it than that. It's really important to have those declarations, but action needs to follow. And that action has to include reevaluating your investments in light of your teachings, and then putting that front and center and saying to your investment manager, you know, this is what we believe in. What can you do for us? And if they can't do it, you go to someone else. When the bishops then went to actually divest, they had the asset managers lining up because they saw the market was shifting. Faiths have the capacity to shift the markets. However, we're in a COP where we're heading in the opposite direction of where we need to go. I was at the Climate Action Tracker launch this morning, and it was shocking to see how many countries, they listed all the countries that are expanding fossil fuels, and it's really disturbing. The UAE plans to increase fossil fuel production by 40% by 2030. So, but they're joined, they're not on their own, by Australia, by the US, by Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Indonesia, Turkey, Argentina, Kazakhstan, and the list continues. So we're in a really critical moment. And this comes to, in my view, in what needs to happen next and why we're here today. The focus needs to be kept on fossil fuels. Because in Ireland, we have this joke about changing a light bulb. I don't know if it translates in other cultures, but it's around how many people does it take to change the light bulb? Well, it feels sometimes at COPs that we're doing everything apart from the light bulb, which is fossil fuels. You know, we were going around the place talking about everything apart from the one thing we need to be doing. So that needs to happen. We need to recognise we're all in collusion with this system of fossil fuels. And faiths in particular need to look at their investments and their banking and look at how they can get out of that and managed, and like it can be a managed, timed, but you signal, the signal is so important. Imagine if the US diocese, there's 170 Catholic dioceses in the US, not one has divested from fossil fuels, as far as I'm aware. And yeah, it would make send a huge signal and be very important. And then the second thing is need to be far more bold and prophetic about what we actually invest in. And take a mentality of proactively seeking out the real solutions to climate change and nature-based solutions in terms of our what we choose to invest in. We should have the horizon of eternity in how we invest. We need to look beyond the short term, beyond the long term, because faiths are there because they believe there's an after as well. And we need to have that as our horizon. And don't be constrained by what you're told can and can't be done, but work with your managers or find new ones if they can't oblige. And then finally, they're so important at this stage because of the crisis we're now in to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty as part of a reform of the UNFCCC. Because as we know and has been said already, Paris Agreement does not mention fossil fuels. And that's for various reasons at the time, but it's like the light bulb. we can't change the light bulb unless we're talking about the light bulb. So it's so important as part of this process that by the end of COP28, we are really addressing, and that's what this COP will be judged on the phase out of fossil fuels. It's the measure of the key measure is success. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lorna. And I think she started us with a very good question for reflection for all of us. Are faith institutions getting out of fossil fuels? And you rightly said faith institutions really matter because we are the bearers of wisdom, education, etc. But we are also players in the global financial markets. That is something to think about. I have to say, it's not often on a panel I hear somebody talking somewhat well about our government. That was interesting to look at the work you did with the government and how faith institutions do matter. And we know this working in New York with member states. Many of the Secretary Generals says, ignore faith people at your peril. And I think that's really, really important. You said about maybe COP is going in another direction, and maybe it is, but maybe we just need to get that light in, the bulb in, and keep it lighting. Thank you very much indeed. And our next speaker, I'm delighted to say, is Sepra Berman. She's currently the International Programme Director at Stand Earth and the Chair of Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. She's the former co-director of Greenpeace International's Climate and Energy Programme and co-founder of Forest Ethics. In 2006, Sepora was appointed by the Alberta government to co-chair the Oil Sands Advisory Working Group, tasked with making recommendations to implement climate change and cumulative impact policies, and was listed as one of the 35 most influential women in British Columbia business magazine. In 2015, she was awarded the YWCA Women of Distinction Award in British Columbia, and in 2013, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of British Columbia. That's a wow bio. Sepra, you're going to talk to us about how a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty will help us meet the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Thank you so much. I'm so moved to be here, to see the support and incredible work by all of you and these tremendous faith leaders and so many of the faith community around the world. We've come so far in just 3 years. For those who don't know, the idea of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty was only launched 3 years ago during COVID, actually, online, Climate Week 3 years ago. Even just last year at COP27, when we arrived at COP27, we had one country, Vanuatu, who had proposed the fossil fuel treaty on the floor of the UN General Assembly. Today here at COP, we have 11 countries as of yesterday, with Samoa endorsing the treaty. And the movement is growing around the world. It is, it's like in some ways like a dream come true for me. I've been working on fossil fuels and oil and gas issues for many decades now. And I want to tell you a little bit about where the idea of the treaty came from and the logic behind it. I did a lot of work for years in Canada, in Alberta, in the oil sands. It's the single largest industrial fossil fuel project on Earth. It is a tremendous operation that you can now see from space. Just the tailings ponds with the toxic water from the development of the oil sands now are 1 trillion liters of toxic water in the center of Canada, and they're leaking and poisoning downstream Indigenous communities. I thought for many years that Canada wasn't cleaning this up or addressing the growth of the tar sands, even though every year we couldn't meet our climate targets, in part because we had a government that didn't believe in climate change. And then we got a new government, the Trudeau government, that does believe in climate change, and came to Paris, and with his hand on his heart, Trudeau said, Canada's back and we're going to fight climate change. And they did. They put in place tremendous policies, a national price on carbon and zero emission vehicle policies and other policies to reduce emissions. But the size of the oil sands just continued to grow. And the government kept approving more oil drilling and more fracking. And for me, it was that moment when I realized that there was this incredible disconnect between climate policy and the science. We know that fossil fuels are 86% of the carbon that's trapped in our atmosphere today. It comes from three things: oil, gas, and coal. Yet for 30 years, we have been negotiating climate emissions and targets while allowing fossil fuel production to grow and not constraining the production of those three products, not even having a conversation about fossil fuels. The words don't even appear in the Paris Agreement. My work took me to other places around the world to try and understand how other people were dealing with this. And I've been lucky enough some of the exact same companies saying some of the exact same things. And in all of those countries, you still have governments that are saying that fossil fuel expansion is not a climate issue, despite the fact that fossil fuels are 86% of the emissions trapped in our atmosphere today. And so I realized that we needed a way to come together, that we can't continue fighting these fights one by one, that we are stronger together than we are apart. And I started thinking about what is the one campaign, what is the one ask that the climate movement and water protectors and Indigenous people and frontline communities, what's the one ask that we have to governments? There's been some incredible work and intellectual capital to dig up stuff that we know we can't burn, or it will burn us, because we didn't have a policy pathway. We don't have any international agreements for countries to cooperate. And right now, every country knows we need to use less fossil fuels, but they all want to be the last barrel sold. Because this is the most profitable industry on the planet. And it's the most powerful industry on the planet. And that's why we need to stand together. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is a vision of governments cooperating together to create new rules during the transition of who gets to produce what and how much. And those rules need to be based on equity, on fairness. And we need new tools of global governance to manage the transition away from fossil fuels. It's based on three simple pillars. We need to stop the expansion of oil, gas, and coal. And countries need to cooperate to do that at this critical moment in history. This critical moment in history when 5 million people lost their lives last year alone just due to lethal heat. When 7 million people lost their lives last year due to the air pollution from fossil fuels. That's why we called it the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Because today, fossil fuels are weapons of mass destruction. They kill more people every year than anything else on Earth. So we know we need to stop the expansion, and we need to manage a wind down in a way that is equitable and fair. And we need new tools to do that. New tools that will help us meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Fossil fuels will decline. Renewables are cheaper. Policies are being put in place around the world to ban fossil fuel cars, to increase renewables and electrification. We will get off fossil fuels, but the question is, will it be a managed decline or an unmanaged decline? Who will benefit and who will suffer? And how fast will that decline be? And this makes sense to people around the world. And that's why this movement is growing so quickly. Grassroots people of faith and leaders of religious institutions representing more than 1.5 billion people are now calling for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty from all faiths around the world, spanning every continent on Earth. And in fact, they're now joined by 101 Nobel laureates, 3,000 scientists, 100 cities, 11 countries. This movement is growing every single day. So a lot of people ask me, what can I do to help you? Can I just give you a minute? This is my last. Yes. Make it your own. The Secretariat is here to support you with information and ideas and to support the governments as they design the treaty. We can provide you with materials, but we need people around the world to make this their own and to organize. So I ask you to do two things. Pray. Pray for world leaders to listen to the science, the people, and their hearts. Pray because when we're connected to the earth, to the divine, and to each other, we're more resilient. And then organize. Organize because we need to grow this movement to keep up the pressure. Because some say this idea is too big or too bold. But I think here in this room, we don't have time for more of the same. And we know that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sephora, and I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but no, I'm looking at the time as well. I got on a roll. I suppose one of the important things you talked about was the importance of governments that believe in climate change and how they need to align their policies to go with that. The other thing that struck me there at the end, which you talked about, that in many ways we're isolated, but we need not be. We need to be fighting the same fight, and we are stronger together, as we saw with the music there and the group that the Archbishop showed us. So thank you very much indeed, Sephora. Is Ibrahim there? The next group, please. So we're going to invite the three panelists on our next session, which is to act. Our first speaker is Roy Ibrahim, and he's the International Program Coordinator at YCS. He holds a master's degree in Development Economics and International Development from the University Gustave Eiffel
and an international economics master's degree from the University in Paris. Roy, you now have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. So, hello everyone. I'll be speaking about integral ecology related to climate change. So let's first dumb up some basic definitions. First, ecology is the study of the relationship between the living organisms and the environment in which they develop. But when we talk about integral ecology, we want to understand the holistic approach that addresses the challenges of this development of those living organisms in their environment. So this includes all aspects of creation in terms of interconnectedness, so including the environment, society, and humanity as well. In his encyclical Laudato Si, Pope Francis highlights the concept of integral ecology, urging for a holistic understanding of the environment crisis, recognizing the intricate relationship between environmental degradation from one side and poverty and social injustice from another side. So he asserts that everything is connected and that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one. We have seen previously the effects of climate change. I will not go over back to them, but we can say that they are not evenly distributed because vulnerable communities, often located in developing countries or rural areas, they have limited resources and capacity to adapt and mitigate the effects. So tackling climate change necessitates a serious global effort to reduce the gas emissions and to promote sustainable practices. This would enhance the resilience among the vulnerable communities. So what is the Catholic teaching on climate change? Pope Francis shared a huge appeal. It was a huge political call in 2015, and that was the first call from a religious leader to the politicians of the world, saying that we are leading a terrible world war against creation. It's like human interests against nature thriving. And then in Laudato Deum, which was published in October this year, 1 or 2 months ago, he offered also an analysis of the causes and the possible solution to a humanity's distorted relationship with nature. So from here comes the concept of educating on integral ecology. We want to implement this understanding and this education among the young leaders and the activists. So he laid 5 essential foundations. First, creation is not an object to be exploited, but a sacred gift of the Creator to be safeguarded. He thinks that the way we relate to nature reflects the way we pray to God. Second is to personify the poverty of our Mother Earth in a way that we need to build also an ecological citizenship and to hear also to the signs of the earth. Environmental poverty and social poverty are tightly connected. The value of small steps and dialogue is immense. Education about alliance between humanity and the environment is a must. And here also comes the concept of ecological citizenship. The problem is that we still don't have the necessary culture to face this crisis. And for life to thrive on Earth, we need to build leadership that paves ways to adequate response to the needs of the current generations, including everyone, without compromising the future generations. And we need also to address this to the leaders, not only to the individuals, leaders of military and weapon industry in the world, governments who can't stop testing weapons and nuclear power and diffusing radiation. So it is not only about asking to reduce plastic, I'm saying not only, but also we need to advocate for policies, and we need to be sensing a global solidarity to achieve our global goal. So an effective climate education not only spreads awareness, but also will equip individuals and future leaders with the knowledge and the skills to mitigate climate impacts and adapt to changing conditions. We don't necessarily need technocrats to do this. Pope Francis was not an ecologist. Pope Francis was not a scientist, but still he moved many people. He moved many political leaders. He moved actually all the Catholic movements since 2015. So I think we will reap the fruits of what he planted and what all as activists and leaders of organizations and academics are trying to do. So we will sum up with few recommendations why we want to educate and implement integral education. We want to access the quality climate education because we want it to be inclusive and to reach all levels of society, especially the vulnerable communities. This is the way we want to act. We want to educate people so they can have future scientists and engineers to create a green innovation. I here join my voice to all the speakers who are here, and especially Ms. Bremen, to say that in order to meet also halfway and to stop fossil fuels, we need to find an alternative, a green alternative. So let's encourage the new generations to find ways to create green mechanism and industries, because all what is happening today is only to respond to the needs of the society and of our lifestyle and the consumption and the way we live. So if we can shift the way we live, if we can shift to a more holistic and integral and wellness lifestyle, we maybe not need that much of products and polluted goods, and then we can give the way to some green innovation, to some green technologies to save our future. So here, finally, we urge all the parties in COP to really consider the Loss and Damage Fund to be also oriented on climate education and green innovations. So we can, from one side, start to reduce fossil fuels and gas emissions, and on the other side, shift to a more green technology and start being also realistic in what we are advocating for. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed, Ibrahim. And I loved your passion for what you were talking about in terms of loss and damage. And also, you know, that connection with the cry of the earth and the poor, and how vulnerable people have limited resilience. But then if we change our ways of operating, maybe they will have a more holistic life in the future. And I was very interested in about the shift in Pope Francis on what he did with his limited knowledge, but just had this passion for people. So thank you very much indeed. And now it comes to Liana Almany. Liana is no stranger to me, as she's the Executive Assistant and Assistant Representative to the UN at Unanima International in New York. Liana, some of your bio has just gone off the screen, but you can say whatever you like about yourself. But I do know you hold a master's degree in international relations, and you have been a great advocate in the last few months for women and children and girls at the UN in New York. Liana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean, for that introduction. It's an honor to be here in Dubai presenting on a topic so close to my heart alongside this panel of esteemed colleagues. We've talked a lot today about integral ecology, emphasizing the relationship between ecological and social issues, and advocating for a holistic vision of sustainability. We've also discussed the need to shrink our carbon footprint while leaving no one behind, and the importance of confronting the needs of vulnerable communities as we transition from fossil fuels to accessible and renewable clean energy for all. And we know that women and girls are overrepresented among these vulnerable communities most impacted by climate change. So I'm going to take this opportunity to weave all these threads together and illustrate the interconnection of these issues through a more narrow focus, the gendered impacts of climate displacement. By focusing on the experiences, expertise, and marginalization of the women and girls who are most impacted by climate change, it becomes clear how intersecting environmental, economic, and cultural factors underlie both the challenges and solutions to climate change. UN Environment estimated in 2022 that 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. This is largely because women face conditions of marginalization and exclusion before disasters and displacement even occur, leading to a lack of representation, agency, power, and independence. This results in lowered resilience and adaptation capacity for women and girls in the face of climate-induced crises. Unanima International's advocacy work and research on family homelessness has taken us all over the world, where testimonies shared with us from the grassroots illustrate the ways in which climate change has disproportionately homelessness of women and girls globally. One woman from Kenya, who I'll call Mary, shared with us her experience with drought and unproductive soil after years of erosion, resulted in famine, loss of livelihood, and scarcity-fueled conflict. These circumstances were compounded by the unequal access of women to land and assets in her was eventually walk over 250 kilometers to the nearest city in search of refuge and opportunities to provide for her family. After her treacherous journey, however, systemic and ideological gender barriers only pushed her further into the vicious cycle of extreme poverty. This led to her living on the street and later surrendering some of her children to a local orphanage. Her story exemplifies the gendered impacts of climate change and the risk multiplication that happens to vulnerable people already living on the margins of society. In telling this story, I want to recognize that there are many different contexts in which women and girls are displaced by climate change. Whether it's women like Mary, where their dependence on agriculture and unequal expectations to provide for their families leads to their displacement, whether it's Indigenous women displaced from their homes on Pacific Island nations due to rising sea levels, with no choice but to flee their ancestral land, or whether it's women already displaced by conflict, who are then displaced again by floods and fires that wreak havoc on their refugee camps. In each of these contexts, women experience compounding risks linked to their gender and exacerbated by their displacement. So not only are women and girls vulnerable to climate displacement, they are also vulnerable in climate displacement. Displaced people often reside in substandard shelters, which are among the first to be hit when disasters strike. Health, gender violence, and human trafficking. Furthermore, the lack of gender-responsive care women and girls face around the world as a result of climate displacement points to the need for gender-responsive policy and the empowerment of women with lived experience to be agents of change. Climate change mitigation, disaster reduction, and adaptation policies cannot be holistically developed or implemented without the inclusion of women who understand the unique and compounding vulnerabilities which both cause and worsen climate displacement. Adaptation to the consequences of climate change requires strengthening the resilience of people in the human mobility context. This is why we need to work with frontline communities, those who understand the specific realities of women displaced by climate change because they've lived it, so we can meet people where they are and provide informed support. Women and girls are the creators of their own resilience. They just need the space and support to do so. On that note, I want to talk for a moment about financing, which, as we all know, COP28. Existing climate funds rarely and insufficiently provide direct support to individuals. The Loss and Damage Fund needs to to finance both before and after they are displaced, and this keeps them from supporting themselves and supporting their communities. We need to provide financial incentives in which uplift women and girls in the face of climate challenges like displacement. Women have the ingenuity and ideas to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and they just need the tools to push those solutions forward. When we invest in women, we invest in human capital, and this has many benefits for society as a whole. Ultimately, we need a paradigm shift, not just through the power of presence, but also in how we view women in migration and displaced populations more broadly.
where they harm the environment, harm the water systems, harm air, animals, people. Fast fashion creates 100 billion garments every single year. 92 million tons of textile waste goes into landfills a year. 60% of the clothing that we wear is actually plastic. It's synthetic fibers, polyester, acrylic, and nylon. We know what that does to the environment. Fast fashion produces 42 million tons of plastic waste a year. It's actually the second most plastic polluting industry behind the packaging industry. 10% of the plastic that ends up in our oceans every year is from fast fashion. And as I told you before, it's 10% of the carbon emission. Creates an incredible ecological imbalance, massive water use, chemical pollution, deforestation, and something that's very important to me is the textile waste generation. Pope Francis urges us to be responsible. Each year, the fast fashion industry produces these 92 million tons of textile waste that fill landfills, contribute to environmental degradation. Most of that textile waste does not end up in landfill capture systems that actually can mediate the gas emission and the water leach and environmental damage. An enormous amount of it is shipped to the global south, where it creates incredible damage to the ecosystems, to people, to air quality, to the environment. Social justice and solidarity. Pope Francis advocates for solidarity, and fast fashion creates detrimental effects that disproportionately impact the most vulnerable communities. And we've heard about that. And vulnerable communities in the global south who are shouldering the burden of this consumption mindset. Of those communities, women and children are the most negatively impacted. It undermines the interconnection that our Catholic leadership calls for, the interconnection of creation. It undermines respect for all of God's creatures. The leather and fur industries that are linked to fast fashion involve incredible cruelty to animals, create suffering that contradicts our call to treat all living beings with compassion and care. And finally, fast fashion goes against Pope Francis's call for ethical alternatives that support our planet and our people. Drawing from both letters, Pope Francis advocates for ethical and sustainable fashion choices that align with our Catholic values. An encouragement of support to businesses that prioritize fair, just labor practices, environmental responsibility, and a more just and sustainable world. The next right thing to do to act: buy less, buy used, choose non-synthetic fibers, trade swap, and build a more compassionate and responsible fashion industry. Your voice is necessary. Act now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie. I have to say your stats are frightening. I think we need to take a breath, but also I think your call for justice and dignity for all in everything you've said is really a takeaway for us this evening, and I really appreciate that very much indeed. I know we're coming to the very end, and it's been
En la puerta del sol, como el año que fue, otra vez el champán y las uvas y el alquitrán. La alfombra
Los petardos que borran sonidos de ayer y acaloran el ánimo para aceptar que ya pasó uno más.
Y en el reloj de antaño, como de año en año, 5 minutos más para la cuenta atrás. Hacemos el balance de lo bueno y malo. 5 minutos antes de la cuenta atrás. Marineros, soldados, solteros, casados, amantes, andantes y alguno que otro vez distao. Entre gritos y gritos, los españolitos enormes, bajitos, hacemos por una vez algo a la vez. 5 minutos más para la cuenta atrás. Hacemos el balance de lo bueno y malo.